Today's youth need teachers, volunteers, and most of all, well, they need you. I'm Doug Edwards, and I'm going to be talking with real youth mentors and students to give you the knowledge you need to be the best youth worker possible. This is Youth Worker on Fire.
Oh, you're trying to bring me down and run me out of town. You're taking what you want, but you can't take my rhythm now. I'm walking to my own beat, just gonna be me. I'm not replicating nobody. You wanna be like me.
I knew Heather this is Heather Clendinen, used to be Heather Strong. That was her maiden name, if you use that term anymore. So Heather Strong Clendinen. And I knew her in high school for sure. Did we meet in middle school? I don't even remember. It's been so long ago.
I would think not, because I went to Faith Lutheran.
I knew all your friends from Faith Lutheran, though.
Probably. And I came over to the middle school for 1 year only. So
Okay.
I don't know that we had any overlap. I remember meeting you in high school and that kind of being the beginning of my exposure to both Trinity and that youth group and
Right.
you at the high school. So
Yeah, for sure. But I saw you diving before I ever knew you were a gymnast. I might not have known that till you were in college. I don't even know how that transpired. But when I saw Heather diving, it was like perfection. In fact, they don't even have diving teams in the local high schools here now. You have to go to South Lake, and there's an Olympic training center there. And what is that called down there? Is it a World Training Center? I can't remember, in Claremont. But you can go diving there now. It came as a result of the triathlons and stuff that ended up in South Lake County. We're in Lake County, for those of you who are in other parts of the world and other parts of the nation, Lake County, Florida, which is right outside of Orlando. So here Heather is, she's diving, and I just hadn't seen that much in the diving realm, but we had some great guy divers, and I believe you were the only female. Is that right? The only lady, gal? Is that right?
I think at the beginning I was, but then one of my sisters also joined the team, and I think there was another add-on.
That's right.
At some point.
So how far apart are your twin sisters and you?
So they're 15 months younger than I am.
Only 15 months. Okay. So yeah, they would have shared some of those things with you. It's been a while.
Yes.
So, but then everything made sense when I found out that you were a gymnast. You trained with Brandy Johnson, I believe. That's her name, right?
Yeah.
They had the gold medalist, Brandy, and you guys your parents were great parents that really believe in their kids. They would drive you all the way to Altamont, I believe.
Yes.
And that's where you did all of your training.
Yes.
And then you had an injury. Were you thinking Olympics bound yourself at that time, at that young time in your life?
Yeah. So in reflecting about that, no, I didn't. So I was much too realistic for that. I think probably when I was probably 5 and 6, when I first started into gymnastics, I probably had dreams of becoming an Olympian athlete. And I certainly admired, like at that time, Nadia Comaneci and all the Romanian gymnasts were like the stars. And then later, not long after, Mary Lou Retton. But no, as I progressed in my gymnastics career, I'm very practical, and I think I had my eyes set on a college scholarship and performing gymnastics and competing at the collegiate level.
But you had an injury or something, is that right?
Yes. Yeah. I had a very significant injury. So that happened during my freshman year in high school, actually right prior to my freshman year in high school. Yeah, I was I was competing at a qualifying gymnastics competition, and back then they didn't have these levels. Nowadays they have level 1 through 10. Back then, it was not at all like that. It was class 1 through 4, and class 1 being the highest. And so I was at a class 1 meet, and I suffered a pretty significant injury on the floor exercise. I was tumbling, and when I landed, I collapsed. I felt very excruciating pain and collapsed. Everyone in the gym heard a loud popping noise. I remember seeing my coach, who was across the gym with another group of our gymnasts who were competing, leaping across the gym over chairs to kind of come and collect me and carry me off the floor. Obviously they took me to the hospital, and my fifth metatarsal bone in my left foot was absolutely shattered. But then when they went in to do the surgery, they knew that they were going to have to pin the bone together. They actually had found that the tendon that is supposed to be attached to that fifth metatarsal bone, because the X-ray didn't image that, they didn't do a CT or an MRI, so they didn't know. But that tendon had actually retracted up into my lower leg, like a kind of a window shade. And so they had to go up into my leg and pull it down, and then they had to re-sew that tendon and pin that bone. And so, I was on crutches for, approximately the entirety of my ninth grade freshman year. So I was on crutches for about 9.5 months.
Did you know that was it for gymnastics? Did they say, listen, this is not ever going to happen again. If you do, this is going to destroy your foot or your tendon or whatever? Or was that your practical side that came in?
Well, I think at that time, right, gymnastics was my whole world. It was my identity. That's all I ate, slept, drank, dreamed about. And I think everyone around me was like, oh, she's young, she can rebound. And they have a pretty good, I went to Brown's Gymnastics, and they had some pretty good relationships with some sports med and rehab people out there, and with some podiatrists. So as soon as I could kind of stabilize myself, I actually went back to the gym, and I was doing all the strength and weight training with the other gymnasts as much as my mom would allow me to. So no, I was back out there, and it was not until after I had the cast removed, the pin removed. I had to actually go through intense PT, physical therapy, to actually learn how to walk again, because my leg was the size of my arm. I remember when they took off the cast, I got really nauseous and woozy and almost passed out because of just how it threw my vestibular system was all out of whack and balance. So no, after PT, I actually went back to the gym and kind of gradually went back to practice full time. But I found over that summer, probably beginning to midsummer, that I had expended all my energy. I felt like I was to the absolute limit, and I felt like I was hitting a ceiling that I just couldn't push past. And that was all to just return to kind of the level that I was at prior to the injury. So at that point, my coach, I think again, kind of some of the practical realization was dawning on me, and my coaches were kind of counseling me to look into diving as an alternative. So, which I did.
So it was them that actually encouraged you that way. Wow. Well, that's good.
Yeah.
That's very good. Smart of them, because it's still very much gymnastics.
Yeah. Well, I had a really supportive, so my immediate coach I had been with for maybe 6 years, and he was very great. He was supportive. So I can, he was looking out for the actual individual gymnast, not just the team
Yeah, for sure. And we're going to go back to a little bit of diving. Let me tell our people, though, the reason I felt God just telling me I need to call Heather for this interview. That's only happened a couple of times with a couple different people. So I don't exactly know everywhere that we're going, but I know that she loves Jesus Christ. I know that she had good experiences in student ministry or children in there, and we're going to go through some of that. But I also knew she was on this track, and here we are at the 2024 Olympic time, and I know that she's probably aware of a lot of the stuff that's happened there. I don't know if you watched it or not, or that's something you just don't do anymore. But my wife and I, we watch a lot of the things, and we have some specific interest in it this year. And then I saw your diving, and your diving was just impeccable. And so we're going to go into the spiritual of all this and different things that have happened in your life. But let's talk about the diving, though. How much training did you go through? Were you on the diving team your sophomore year, or was that not even recovery enough?
So it was during my sophomore year when I started diving. So then I dove my junior and senior year as well. And so I think the biggest transition was just learning to land on my head in water and not on my feet.
Right.
But and obviously there's a lot of technique that goes into even just walking on the diving board, because I did springboard. I did 1 meter and 3 meter, though, in the high school level, they didn't train or compete 3 meter. But so Hank Mast was my coach, and he was an old soul, and he just he just had a lot of experience, and I think he had worked with gymnasts, recovering gymnasts in the past, and so he was able to just give me a lot of great advice and training. So I started that summer. So I guess I can't remember back then. I think it was diving and swimming was a fall sport. So maybe in September we started competing. But so it was my sophomore year, and I was definitely a novice in terms of, learning all the different dives and so forth. But at least the flipping and the twisting was a pretty easy transition.
Right, exactly. Because of it doesn't get much harder than doing it on the floor.
Right.
And or on a beam, and then transferring that. And I'm sure that, right, just like you said, the landing on your head, the one thing you don't want to do in gymnastics is land on your head. And so now you got to land on your head. All right, that makes sense. Right. Makes sense. But impeccable, I remember that. And this is my last thing I'm going to tell them before we go into the rest of your story. And that is, Heather's in college. She's at Florida State University, and I need another staff person for a middle school retreat. Now, youth workers will listen to this, but also, Heather, we've got parents and grandparents, and because anyone who has any touch in a adolescent's life, basically, I still consider a youth worker, not just youth pastors and FCA directors, all those things, and you've dealt with this, you've still been a youth worker because you've had 4 children to go through adolescence and going through adolescence. I call Heather up and I say, I need another staffer for this long middle school weekend. Could you possibly do this? And I don't remember if you answered immediately yes, or you said, well, let me make some calls. And I said, listen, you're going to have to meet us in Jacksonville, though. We're going to go up there. So on a bus, we'll take care of everything, but we need another staff lady. And I knew of her reputation, and she and I knew each other. And so felt very confident that she'd be a fit. And she was an incredible fit. But this is her tenacity and that discipline of an athlete that's beyond the average athlete, which I think gymnastics and divers, that sort of level of person is. She comes with a stack of books from the university. I'm going, how is she going to take care of these students and take these books? When's she going to study? I don't think you slept. Maybe more than an hour or hour a night, maybe, or something like that. You studied on the bus. You studied in the hotel. You just, that is just a mechanical mind that says, I have to do this. I'm going to make this commitment to. So do you remember all that? I really don't remember bringing the books and so forth. That doesn't sound out of character, but I don't remember that. No, I just really have memories of being in awe of how much junk food the middle schoolers consumed over the course of that weekend. You should have been in awe of how much junk food the staffers could also ingest.
Probably.
So, probably. But no, that makes sense to the kids, yeah. Oh, they ate incredible amounts.
I have a few teens in my life right now. So, yes, I can attest to that. I buy a bag of chips and it's gone in 30 minutes.
Exactly.
When I get home from the store. So, yeah.
But you were an amazing fit. I would have kept you if I could have. You would have stayed for years with us, but you had your goals. You had to get through school and do the things you do. Now, you're a physical therapist, right?
No, I'm a speech pathologist. So I'm a speech language pathologist. Although a physical therapist would be a good fit with my story.
It would be. And I should know you're a speech pathologist because I've seen you in areas where you were actually doing that. But that's what it was. So forgive me for not getting my research. But if you would now, just give us a bit of your backstory. Take us through to where you are now. Give us a catch up to where you are up to date. But just give us some backstory of your family and spiritual growth and all that stuff.
Yeah, sure. So, interestingly enough, I feel like gymnastics really plays a prominent role in my whole testimony of how the Lord brought me to himself. So I was definitely born like a middle child in a church going family where my parents, though, largely relied on the church that we were going to and the Christian school that my brother and sisters and I were attending for like all of our Christian education. So there was not a whole lot of that we did at home, but at school, I'm very thankful because we received really a strong Lutheran education where Bible was taught daily and we had chapel weekly. And the biggest thing for me was that the scripture memorization was like a huge part. It was a critical part of that education program. And I felt like the Lord really used that foundation of biblical knowledge to really bless me and really advance me in my understanding of the Lord and my faith and kind of what He has been doing in His story. And so I'm really grateful for that foundation. But yeah, so at the age of 5, my kindergarten teacher pulled my mother aside and suggested that she might consider putting me in gymnastics because evidently, like at recess, I was swinging on bars and leaping around and had lots of energy. And I think at the time I was in ballet class, and so that seemed like a better fit. So Mom enrolled me in gymnastics along with my sisters, and actually I think my brother too, at first recreationally, and then pretty quickly, not long after, I started competing. So I started competing probably when I was 5 later that year. So anyways, fast forward kind of to I talked to you about the injury before my freshman year, and I just really feel like that rocked my whole world. Although I think at the time I was unaware of it because again, that was my whole identity. And so it kind of seemed like my whole world was off kilter. And looking back, I kind of think about, I think it was Pascal who talked about the God-shaped vacuum in each person's heart that can't be filled by created things, but people do their best to try to stuff, things in there to kind of fill that hole that we have. And that was gymnastics had been, squished down into that hole. So I didn't recognize that I had that hole. But once gymnastics was removed, I felt like there was this gaping kind of emptiness. And again, that I kind of gradually had a growing awareness over that year. So really during that sophomore year, because at the time I would say that I would have said that I was a Christian. I would have said that I knew that Jesus died on the cross for my sins. And so I had all the head knowledge thanks to my Christian education and going to church weekly, because the church we attended did preach the gospel faithfully week in, week out, though it was a more passive presentation of the gospel, kind of like you guys already know about this. So there's not a whole lot to do about it. So it kind of, for me, boiled down to more moralism at that point for me. But so anyways, that year, that whole sophomore year, there was really this spiritual battle that was waging on in my heart. That was, I think, growing knowledge to me, but my poor mother, right? I think she was ill-equipped to handle anything like that. She did recognize that I think something was wrong, but couldn't put her finger on it. And again, I feel like I was entirely ill-equipped to describe what was going on with me, because I think it was all spiritual, right? And at that point, I wasn't a believer. And so my spiritual eyes I was blind to what was going on. So during that year, kind of when I was having this crisis of identity, actually a fellow gymnast attempted suicide. And so I actually went to, and it was a failed attempt. And so I and a bunch of other gymnasts went to spend the weekend with her. And I felt like, at the time, that was helpful for her. I felt like that only planted a seed in my heart and life. So that actually led me to a really dark place where I was really obsessed with death and just really dark, negative thoughts. And again, I think anyone on the outside wouldn't really have had much of a clue. Everything looked pretty normal, I think, on the outside, with the exception of my mom. But again, kind of being introduced to that idea, I was starting to think that, suicide wasn't a viable option and could make things better, not only for myself, but I could recognize that I was in my behavior and just not doing well, that it was negatively affecting my family and my mom and so forth. And so, so later that year, I actually attempted suicide, trying to overdose on the pain pills for my surgery that prior year. So I somewhat pushed back about people, the whole idea that people are seeking the Lord and accept the Lord and receive Him. I really had the opposite experience in my life. I felt like I was fleeing from God. I was running to the gates of hell, pounding on the door, asking them to let me in. And it was really God's gracious providence that held those doors fast, because the amount of pills that I took surely should have had the intended effect. So after kind of a providential but unexpected conversation with my future husband, not long after, I felt like the Lord opened my eyes and drew me to Himself. And I was able to not only recognize Jesus as my Savior, but also my Lord. And I felt like all that information and head knowledge and scripture that was in my head was able to make the connection with my heart. I love that verse in Colossians that says, "For He's rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son He loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins." I love that verse in Colossians, and I feel like that really kind of speaks to my story, because I was definitely not seeking the Lord at that point. I thought I was good, but it was God's chasing after me and changing my heart and opening my eyes. And so I think that again, gymnastics was kind of a critical piece that the Lord used in that trauma and removing something. I always tell my kids that, the Lord is a jealous God. And if we put something above Him and we love something more than we love Him, He's jealous, and he wants what's best for us, because He loves us the most, and only He will suffice. So He will often remove those things as an act of severe mercy. And so that was definitely my experience, that so He removed kind of that heart idol from my life and showed me my sinfulness and opened my eyes. So
that is wonderful. And it's wonderful for us to hear as youth workers, people that are working with students. What it looks like on the outside is almost never what it's looking like on the inside of an individual.
Right.
Most of us would have never known, couldn't tell with you. But your mom, moms have a way. Dads too, but moms have this intuition.
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the negatives about the costs of being in rigorous or advanced sports is that I didn't see my dad functionally. I did not see him for years on end, because he woke up at 4 a.m. and would leave the house before we woke up for school. He got home at 3. I probably saw him maybe for half hour before I ate and left for the gym. And I didn't get home until 9:30, 10 each night, and he would be in bed already. It's amazing. I remember we had dinner one evening, and this was right, maybe in 7th grade or 8th grade. And I looked at him, and they've reminded me of this before, but I looked at him, I said, "Dad, when did you get gray hair?" I just had not, those years were very limited. And my dad, I love my dad, and we had always a very, very close relationship, but there was a cost to spending that time away.
Yeah, there is a cost. Anytime you go for excellence, and it starts at a very young age for sports and other areas too. Sometimes even academics. Sometimes it's the arts, but sports. We seem to see the distinction very clearly, and you hear of many of the athletes after the Olympics especially if they're medal winners, that they have a hard time adjusting when it's done.
Sure. Right. Again, I think a lot of their identity is wrapped up in it. So if your identity is not in Christ and it's in something that's fleeting and changing, you're going to have a hard time, right?
Yes, for sure. And you would know that. I mean, you're a determined spirit. Are the rest of your siblings as determined as you?
Yeah, so my maiden name is Strong, and all of the brother-in-laws and my husband would say, our name holds true, that we are strong women. So I think, we got that. We inherited that trait from our mother, that kind of persistence and dedication and hardworking ethic. Yeah, we got that definitely from my mom.
Yeah, and I was able to talk to your mom some through life with you and your sisters, and very, very strong lady, and of course I knew Dad was on the road a lot and stuff, and and so she has to be strong. My wife was that way too. We discussed that my wife was pretty much a single mom about half the year every year, with all the trips and different things.
As a mom, especially when you have young children, it's a lot on your shoulders.
Do you watch the Olympics at all?
Oh, yes, for sure.
So you are engaged in it because you understand the pain of it, the pain and the victory of it.
I love the pageantry. I love the patriotism and kind of solidarity and standing with those athletes and kind of supporting them and cheering them on. And of course, I have some near and dear sports like gymnastics and like diving that I love to watch. But my boys are into basketball. My two youngest played basketball in local high schools, and so we've watched from surfing to basketball to equestrian events to some swimming and track and field. We've kind of done a smattering, but we've definitely watched almost all of the gymnastics and most of the diving. So.
Yeah. I thought maybe you would like all that and you would have a feeling for all that. Plus, your husband grew up in sports, but grew up with his dad as a coach.
Yes. And for me, gymnastics is even, I would say, later in high school or in college and then when one of my sons, we introduced him to gymnastics, and just there's something when you have invested that much time and energy into a sport. I just remember walking into the gym and the smells and the sights and just everything kind of rushes back to you, that familiarity and that it's wonderful. Like, and as I think as long as you can hold it all in perspective, I think it's all good and right. So, yeah.
And see, that's interesting. Some people will be traumatized by that kind of injury, any kind of injury to take you out. But the one thing I've noticed about incredible athletes, and that is, their thing is not that I was injured, is how soon do I get back? And so for you, it wasn't that the trauma was there. It was the how soon can I get back over, what I'm hearing and what I've seen in other athletes is that it's how soon can I get back? That's the goal. That is, the trauma's there, but you can see yourself beyond the trauma.
The Olympics, I would say definitely, though, my view of the Olympics has changed over time. And as you might expect, as I've grown older, and, in reality, it's, the celebration of man's achievement in these various sports. And by man, I mean men and women, right? Mankind. I believe the Lord is the giver of all good gifts to man, including that physical strength and prowess and mental resilience and skill. But I don't think always man is ready and willing to acknowledge the Creator as the source of those gifts or give him the glory he deserves. So in that way, it somewhat makes me sad, but I do admire and I point these out to my children, those athletes, who give the Lord the credit, all the praise and glory to God. When we homeschooled our kids, and Eric Little is one of the missionaries that the kids read biographies on,
of course,
the one from the Chariots of Fire.
Oh, yes.
And, he famously said, I believe God made me for a purpose. And actually that purpose what in that quote he actually meant was serving as a missionary in China. That was his purpose, life purpose. But then he said, but he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. And so, all things, are given by the Lord. And I think as long as we give him due, credit and glory and honor for that. And, we are called to excellence and do all things for the Lord's honor. So, so it's kind of a mixed view, but, I see those athletes who, point others to the Lord and, display kind of solid Christian ethics like Little, who wouldn't, run on the Sabbath and, do it, and again, do it kind of with that secure foundation that they are a child of God, that's their identity, not their sport. I think even with Simone Biles, you can see some of that maturity as she's come back. I don't know that, I don't know her faith background or her spiritual story, but you can even just see some maturity in being older and being married, and kind of those years have translated to kind of having a different perspective on gymnastics and what she can enjoy and what risks she's willing to take, and even the lightheartedness when she would make mistakes. Like I just remember seeing her in some of the competitions where she would bounce out of bounds on the floor, and she'd kind of give a little look to the camera, even in the middle of her routine, which I think that was in her qualifying, which was just fabulous. But again, you see some different perspective as just holding that in the right perspective, I think is important. In 2001, so John and I had been married for a number of years, and we were up in North Carolina, and we had already had Anna Scott, our first child, and I was having a series of episodes that would appear in clusters that one side of my body would kind of grow numb. I would experience word finding issues. I would be unable to read. I would have visual disturbances. And so at that time, I was working as a speech language pathologist at an inpatient rehab hospital. And I've always worked with the neurogenic population. So I was working with patients who'd had traumatic brain injuries or strokes or head injuries. And so I actually thought I was having TIAs, which are mini strokes or transient ischemic attacks. And so at first I went to my primary doctor and he totally blew me off. He thought I was crazy. But then it occurred several more times and he referred me to a neurologist at Duke. And then at that same time, the neurologist wanted to order an MRI, and he asked if I could be pregnant. And I said, "Oh no, I can't be pregnant." We didn't actually have a maternity rider on our insurance because John was self-employed, and we weren't anticipating having a baby at the time. And he said, "Oh, you need to take a pregnancy test anyways." And we found out, lo and behold, I was pregnant with Jack.
Wow.
But because of the pregnancy, I actually had to wait till I was past my first trimester before they would allow me to have the MRI. And at that time, I was even wondering if I should or needed to do the MRI. But the doctor was like, because they were trying to rule out different conditions, and it could have been a DVT or a deep vein thrombosis and in the brain. And the doctor was like, if you go into labor, you could actually have a rupture and it could cause a stroke while you're delivering the baby. And so we did have the MRI some months later. So all that time, though, it was kind of that waiting. And so I had to wait for the MRI, and during that time, of course, looking up on, Dr. Google, all the things that could be, and my symptoms perfectly matched what could be MS or multiple sclerosis. And so that was one of the conditions that they were trying to rule out. Anyways, months later, had the MRI, and it actually was negative for all of the above. And I was diagnosed with unusual presentations of migraines. So sometimes what I was experiencing was an aura, but I don't have typical aura symptoms. And sometimes I'll have just the symptoms and no headache, which strangely enough.
I've heard of that. Yes.
Yeah. And so of course, also the stress of all that, we didn't have insurance. And so anyways, so we ended up having Jack and then all of our subsequent boys at birthing centers. And we had a beautiful experience actually with that. It was right beside UNC Chapel Hill Hospital. And yeah, so the midwives were amazing and we had a good experience there. So
Best life moment.
getting married. John was my high school sweetheart. So getting married, birth of our children. But I think honestly, as I get older, also seeing your children as they become teens and then young adults, seeing your children make difficult decisions that are God honoring, and kind of growing up and growing as a person, I think is a beautiful thing. I can't point to just one, but
So I get that. And, your best moments are your children's moments or in family.
Yeah.
John told about his side of your love story. He was in episode 10. You're going to be somewhere around 215 or 216. He was in episode 10. So that was a while back. We started this podcast seven and a half years ago.
So I'm sure John's story, he's he definitely has a different take on it than me. I don't know how far back you want to go, but yeah. So we were high school sweethearts. The only reason, so I don't know if you want to hear about even the beginning.
Sure. Yeah.
So John had a good friend, Todd Smith, and Todd was dating a girl, Kara, very seriously, and John couldn't get any time in with his best buddy. So John basically was looking for a date because he talked to Todd, and Todd's like, maybe we should just go out on a double date. That's how we can spend some time together. And John wasn't in any relationship at the time, and he goes, I don't have anybody in mind. I'm not dating anyone or anything like that. And Todd, whom I was on so the swim and the diving team was together, and Todd was a swimmer. He talked to John and he said, you should ask Heather. She's a prude. You would like her. So that was my introduction to John. He was a senior and I was a sophomore. I had never spoken to him. I had been exposed to him just at FCA because we would do the weekly meetings. And so he was a leader at the FCA at Eustis High School. And so John calls me up on Saturday for a date that Saturday night. And my mom, I was out in the yard doing yard work for my mom, and she called me in, and I said, "Hello, this is Heather," and he said, "Hi, this is John Clendinen," and I said, "No, it's not." So for the first 5 minutes, he tries to convince me that it is in fact himself, and I thought it was one of his buddies teasing me and kind of making a prank. And so so the first 5 minutes he's trying to convince me that it is in fact he is who he says he is. And then after I realize it, then I'm totally tongue-tied and embarrassed and can't speak straight, because again, he's a senior and just well known, and I had never spoken to him. And so anyways, it turned out that I couldn't go out with him that night because I had a regular babysitting gig. Interestingly enough, the girl that I used to babysit, her and her siblings, go to our church, and she has 5 children, and her oldest is my third born's age. And it's just funny how small the world is.
It is.
But so anyway, so John, in order to save face, I think, asks me out on a rain check, because again, we're both kind of flummoxed on how the conversation is going. And so actually our first date was to an FCA bonfire for Christmas.
Oh, wow.
And it was actually at Todd Smith's house. And so that was our first date. And then, talk to you about how John was really a pivotal part of how the Lord used him to draw me to himself. And so his testimony and his sharing how the Lord was faithful to him during hard times. And so, so we dated. He went off to college at Duke. He would say, and he has said that he had a miserable freshman year at school because he was kind of torn in 2 places. He was really missing me, but wanting to enjoy being up there at Duke. And so after his freshman year, he came back and he decided that we needed to break up because I was going to be going off to college, and he didn't want me to have that same kind of experience. So we definitely took that time off. I was not very happy with that decision because, my feelings hadn't changed. And so anyways, so I did date a couple of people during my freshman year. And one of those relationships, always beware, one of the guys in my InterVarsity group basically told me that he felt like the Lord told him that I was going to be his wife. Well, that news got around to John, and it's amazing how quickly he reappeared in my life. So from then, I think we resumed dating at some point. So then he proposed. He actually proposed to me, which is such a small world. Things come around. He actually proposed to me at Trinity. We went out to dinner first, and then his good friend Matt helped him arrange like a dessert, candlelit dinner, and a multimedia show with music and about pictures of us as kids, and then our parents, and just all sorts of things, and it was beautiful. So he proposed at Trinity. And then we got married.
No, I remember Matt doing that. Yeah, I remember that. Wasn't there, of course, but I remember Matt talking about it, and that's great. I forgot all about that till you said it.
Yep. So then we got married in 1996. So we had dated off and on for 6 years, mostly 6 years before we got married. I think it's neat how everyone's story's a little bit different. I think from there, I just would say it's like been growing in grace, right? Lots of daily opportunities to ask for forgiveness and to seek forgiveness. And I think we definitely both keep the Lord as the center of our relationship and the foundation, and we both seek to honor the Lord in our marriage. So I think one of the most impactful things, actually, we started attending PCA churches when we were up in North Carolina. And one of the most impactful things I remember hearing, I was in a Bible study with several gals, and several of them were the pastor's wife, like assistant pastor's wife. And I just remember being shocked because one of the assistant pastor's wife stated, that she broke her wedding vows every day, every single day. And I was just, young, new married, and I was just in shock. But obviously what she meant was truly, she didn't love, honor, respect her husband to the fullest extent with all of her heart, soul, strength, and mind. And I appreciated her transparency and showing kind of both just the grace that we need to journey together and point each other to the Lord and encourage one another. So that was a blessing, because I feel like that transparency is helpful. Not just pretending like, oh, everything's perfect and hunky-dory and we don't have any problems. But no, we need to depend on the Lord and ask for his help to honor him in our marriage. So
no, that's a great illustration and thought, because marriage is hard. Marriage is not easy.
It is not a Disney film.
And it's not a Disney film. And I think Shrek would be a better Disney film about marriage than some of the others, right? Might have been Shrek 2. Anyway, but any final thoughts or stories about people who influenced you?
So, I think I'm just very thankful. I think Coach Blake, I'm sure you've heard this before, but just his impact through FCA, but also personally because of his role in FCA, he just really had an open door policy. And so I know, like when John and I back in high school were having rough patches, or we were struggling with, temptations of youth and concerns about purity, he would just actually, Heather, you just either need to break up or you need to get married, right? And like saying the hard things and kind of getting my attention. And that was impactful because we did make the decision at that point in time to like just break up. And so like, yeah, I'm thankful for that, just being available to be a listening ear, but then also speaking truth and not wavering, to kind of say those hard things that, that might make one uncomfortable or might not be received well. So, and then I think in college, it was probably an older student who became a very close friend. She just very purposely sought to disciple me, kind of that Titus 2 mentor or philosophy where she was being mentored by someone older than she was. And then so she was kind of a spiritual daughter to someone else, but then she also sought to be a spiritual mother, and she poured out her life in my life. And so that was impactful as just in just very practical ways. I received encouragement, care, and love for her, especially when I was away, and spiritual encouragement and prayer. But then also that model was really instilled in me about, that we as women in the church always ought to be looking to be a spiritual mother and to someone, while at the same time be on the receiving end of the wisdom and knowledge and experience of those who have gone before us. I would say those two people.
So Heather, listen, I am just over the moon. Thank you so much for spending the time. Your husband, John, says that you are harder to nail down on a schedule than the President of the United States. And and after you shared with me a little bit of your schedule and knowing your background of bringing a stack of books on a middle school retreat, that you can be very intentional in your life. I am very grateful that you were able to carve out some time and let the world, let me hear some of the things I didn't hear and didn't know about your life, your injuries, and some specifics about your children and different things like that. So, and those people that are influencers in student ministry. This podcast is about long-term. The average youth worker has lasted over the years, it seems to be the stat still, about 18 months. So those of us who have gone longer, those 5, 10, 15, 20-year marks, we are encouraging them to go to the distance and for parents to not give up on your kids just because they've left the house. The average adolescent age is 22 for a girl and 25 for a guy. It's a long-term thing, isn't it, Heather?
It is, and it just changes. And it's neat to see how it changes with your children over time. So it can be a real blessing.
Absolutely. All right, dear. God bless you and John. And
thank you.
Praying for y'all. And the world gets to hear a bit of the person that I know in you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Youth Worker on Fire podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and tell your friends. Also, leave a comment and tell us what you think. Stay tuned for more informative episodes.